Welcome back to Avoidant Decoded. If you want to understand what most people completely miss about avoidant behavior and learn how to recognize real connection beneath the surface, make sure you're part of this community by joining the membership, where we go deeper than anyone else. You're about to hear something most people never understand until it's too late. The rarest form of commitment doesn't come with intensity. It comes disguised as something almost invisible. It's quiet, controlled, and easy to overlook, but it breaks every pattern that was built to keep distance. And the moment you recognize it, you'll realize you were never dealing with confusion. You were standing in front of something real. Most people lose the one person who actually chose them, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't recognize the signal in time. There is one specific behavior, rare, almost unnatural for an avoidant, that changes everything. If you see it, you're not dealing with confusion anymore. You're looking at commitment in its rawest form. Here's the problem. Most people are trained to look for loud signals, grand gestures, constant reassurance, overwhelming presence. But avoidant behavior doesn't operate in volume, it operates in deviation. The real signal isn't how much is shown, it's what breaks the pattern. When someone wired to withdraw starts moving closer without being pulled, that's not casual, that's a system override. And if you don't understand what you're seeing, you'll misread it, react wrong, and push away something that almost never happens twice. The behavior to watch for is simple, but it's not easy to fake. It's when an avoidant chooses consistency over distance, without being forced, without being chased, and without losing control. This is the moment everything shifts, because avoidance isn't about lack of feeling, it's about protection. So when protection drops, even slightly, it means something deeper is taking priority. You'll notice it in small, controlled ways, not dramatic, not overwhelming, but steady. They show up again, and again, and again. Not because they have to, but because something inside them is pulling them closer than their fear is pushing them away. That tension between instinct and action is where the truth lives. And here's where most people fail. They test it, they question it, they demand more proof. And in doing that, they force the system back into defense mode. What they don't realize is that this behavior is already the proof. It's the evidence that the internal barrier is lowering. When you respond with pressure, you rebuild the wall they just lowered for you. An avoidant doesn't change through force. They change through safety. And safety isn't created by intensity, it's created by stability. When they move closer and nothing breaks, nothing explodes, nothing demands more than what's being given, the pattern rewires, slowly but permanently. If you're starting to see these patterns and want to understand exactly how to respond without pushing them away, subscribe now. Because most people don't lose the connection due to lack of interest. They lose it because they don't know how to handle it when it finally becomes real. Back to the core truth, when an avoidant chooses you consistently, without being chased, without being controlled, and without losing themselves in the process, that is not temporary behavior. That is a shift in identity. And identity shifts don't happen often. This is the moment where you stop looking for more and start protecting what's already there, because what looks small on the surface is actually massive underneath. It's someone stepping outside of years of conditioning, choosing connection over control, presence over distance. And if you recognize that, and you don't interfere with it, you don't rush it, you don't try to expand it faster than it naturally grows, something rare happens. The connection stabilizes, it deepens, and it becomes something that no longer needs to run. Most people will never experience that, not because it doesn't exist, but because they don't understand it when it appears. So if you see it, don't chase it, don't test it, don't try to control it. Just don't lose it. When an avoidant consistently initiates contact without any external trigger, it reveals something far deeper than simple interest. This behavior goes directly against their natural pattern, which is built around maintaining emotional distance and minimizing dependence. Typically, avoidants respond rather than initiate, and even then, their responses are often measured, delayed, or situational. So when initiation becomes consistent and unprompted, it is not random. It is a deliberate override of an internal system designed to keep closeness at a controlled distance. This matters because avoidance is not a lack of feeling, it is a strategy of regulation. The instinct is to withdraw before vulnerability becomes too real, to create space before attachment feels like risk. Initiating contact disrupts that cycle. It means that, instead of waiting for safety to be guaranteed externally, they are choosing to move toward connection despite the discomfort it naturally creates. That shift is subtle on the surface, but significant underneath, because it requires internal permission to act against years of conditioned behavior. Consistency amplifies the meaning. One isolated moment of reaching out can be explained away by mood, curiosity, or circumstance. But repeated initiation, especially without a clear trigger like conflict, absence, or expectation, shows that the connection is being prioritized internally. It becomes less about reaction and more about intention. They are not responding to pressure or filling silence, they are creating the interaction themselves, which indicates that the desire to connect is beginning to outweigh the instinct to retreat. This is where most people misread the signal. They look for intensity or obvious emotional expression, expecting the same patterns they would see in more openly expressive individuals. But for an avoidant, the act of initiating is the expression. It is the equivalent of stepping forward when their default is to step back. It may appear minimal or understated, but in context, it carries far more weight than louder, more dramatic gestures would in someone without that internal resistance. Understanding this requires shifting focus from what is being said to what is being done against pattern. The significance is not in the frequency alone, but in the contradiction it represents. Each time they initiate without being pulled, they are choosing connection over control, presence over distance, and that choice, repeated over time, signals a level of internal change that cannot be forced, faked, or sustained without genuine attachment driving it. Emotional consistency from an avoidant carries a different weight than intensity because it directly challenges the way their internal system is designed to operate. Intensity is often misunderstood as depth, but in avoidant patterns, intensity can exist without stability. There can be moments of strong presence, heightened attention, or even emotional openness, but these moments are frequently followed by withdrawal. That cycle, close, then distant, is not accidental. It is how regulation happens. The system allows connection briefly, then creates space to regain control. Because of that, intensity alone does not indicate lasting movement toward connection. Consistency, however, disrupts this cycle. When emotional presence becomes steady instead of fluctuating, it shows that the need to retreat is no longer dominating the interaction. This does not mean the behavior becomes overly expressive or dramatic. In fact, it often remains calm, measured, and controlled. The difference is in the reliability. They show up in a similar way across time, without sharp shifts, without disappearing after moments of closeness, and without needing to reset distance to feel stable again. That steady presence is far more difficult to maintain than a single intense moment because it requires ongoing regulation without relying on withdrawal as a release. This shift is significant because avoidant behavior is rooted in managing discomfort. Emotional consistency means they are tolerating that discomfort instead of escaping it. They are allowing connection to exist without immediately balancing it with distance. That requires a level of internal adjustment where closeness is no longer perceived as an immediate threat. It does not mean the fear disappears, but it does mean it is no longer controlling the outcome of their actions. Most people misinterpret this because they are conditioned to respond to peaks. They notice when attention increases, when energy rises, when something feels exciting or different. But those peaks are often temporary and can be part of the existing pattern. What is easy to overlook is the absence of disruption. No sudden pullback, no unexplained silence, no emotional drop after engagement. The interaction remains stable, predictable, and grounded, which may feel less exciting on the surface, but represents a much deeper form of presence. Consistency also reflects intention. It shows that the connection is being maintained deliberately, not just experienced in moments. Instead of reacting to feelings as they come and go, they are choosing to remain engaged, regardless of internal fluctuations. That choice indicates that the connection is no longer something to manage at a distance, but something being integrated into their behavior in a way that aligns with continuity rather than avoidance. When an avoidant allows vulnerability, even in small and controlled ways, it represents a level of trust that goes against their core conditioning. Vulnerability, for this pattern, is not simply about sharing feelings. It is about exposure. It involves revealing internal experiences that they have learned to keep contained, managed, or hidden in order to maintain a sense of independence and control. Because of that, even minor disclosures carry significance. A brief admission of stress, a moment of uncertainty, or a quiet acknowledgement of something personal is not casual behavior. It is a calculated risk taken against an internal system designed to avoid exactly that kind of openness. The key is not the size of what is shared, but the fact that it is shared at all. Avoidant patterns are built on self-reliance, where emotional needs are handled privately and expression is minimized. Allowing someone else to see even a fraction of that internal world requires a shift in perception. It means that, in that moment, the person is no longer being viewed as a potential source of pressure or intrusion, but as someone safe enough to witness what is usually kept hidden. That shift does not happen quickly or easily, and it is rarely dramatic. It appears in subtle forms, often without emphasis, and can be overlooked if the expectation is for large emotional declarations. These moments of vulnerability are also selective. They are not given freely or widely. When they occur, they are directed with intention, which increases their meaning. It shows that the internal boundary is being adjusted, not removed, but opened just enough to allow connection without triggering the usual need to withdraw. This is where trust becomes visible, not through words that label it, but through behavior that reflects it. The willingness to be seen, even briefly, indicates that the fear of losing control is being balanced by the value of the connection. Another important aspect is that this vulnerability often comes without a clear signal or announcement. It may not be framed as something important, and it may not be repeated immediately. Instead, it appears as a moment that can easily be dismissed if not recognized. But within the context of avoidant behavior, it represents movement. It shows that the internal barrier is not fixed, and that access is being granted in a way that aligns with growing trust rather than obligation or external pressure. Responding to this kind of vulnerability requires awareness of its scale relative to the pattern it comes from. What appears small externally is often significant internally, and the meaning lies in the deviation from what is typical rather than the intensity of what is expressed. Effort from an avoidant that appears without pressure, expectation, or external prompting carries a level of authenticity that is often misunderstood. In most cases, their actions are shaped by the need to maintain balance between connection and independence. When effort is driven by obligation, guilt, or the desire to avoid conflict, it tends to feel inconsistent or mechanical. There is a sense that the behavior is being performed to meet a requirement rather than chosen freely. This is why effort that emerges without any visible push becomes so significant, because it indicates that the motivation is internal rather than reactive. Avoidant patterns are structured around minimizing dependency and preserving control over emotional exposure. Because of this, they are less likely to act in ways that could increase closeness unless there is a clear reason or trigger. When they begin to invest time, attention, or energy without being asked, reminded, or indirectly guided, it reflects a shift in what they value. The connection is no longer something they are managing from a distance. It is something they are choosing to engage with on their own terms. This type of effort is usually subtle and measured. It may not look like grand gestures or overwhelming displays of commitment. Instead, it appears in consistent actions that require presence. They make time without being chased, follow through without being monitored, and contribute without being evaluated. These behaviors are easy to overlook because they lack drama, but they reveal something deeper than dramatic actions driven by emotion. They show that the person is willingly allocating resources, time, focus, attention toward the connection without needing a reason imposed from the outside. What makes this particularly meaningful is the absence of resistance. When effort is forced, even slightly, there are often signs of hesitation, withdrawal, or eventual distancing. In contrast, when it is internally driven, it feels more natural and sustained. There is no immediate need to compensate by pulling back because the action itself does not feel like a loss of control. It becomes part of their behavior rather than something that disrupts it. This also changes the dynamic of the connection. Instead of one side maintaining the interaction while the other responds, both sides begin to contribute. The interaction becomes less about managing distance and more about maintaining presence. The effort is not a reaction to circumstances, but a reflection of priority, showing that the connection has moved beyond obligation and into something that is being chosen repeatedly through action rather than requirement. Re-engagement after withdrawal, when it happens calmly and with intention, reveals a level of internal processing that goes far beyond simple avoidance. In most avoidant patterns, withdrawal is not just physical distance, but a way to regulate emotional intensity. When closeness reaches a point that feels overwhelming, the instinct is to step back, reduce contact, and create space to regain a sense of control. What typically follows is either prolonged silence or a return that feels casual, detached, or disconnected from what came before. That kind of return does not require reflection. It is simply a reset back to a safer distance. Intentional re-engagement looks different because it carries continuity. Instead of pretending nothing happened or reappearing in a way that avoids depth, there is a subtle acknowledgement, through tone, timing, or behavior, that the connection still matters. The return is not rushed, defensive, or reactive. It is measured. They come back in a way that feels steady rather than abrupt, suggesting that the space taken was used to process rather than escape. This distinction is important because it shows that withdrawal is no longer the final move in the pattern. It becomes a temporary phase rather than a permanent exit. Calmness during re-engagement is also a key indicator. When someone returns with agitation, urgency, or inconsistency, it often means the internal conflict is still unresolved. But when the return is composed, without overcompensation or emotional spikes, it suggests that they have reached a level of internal clarity. They are not coming back because they feel pressured or because the absence created discomfort alone. They are returning because they have decided to reconnect. That decision implies a degree of awareness about both their own behavior and the connection itself. Another important element is the absence of defensiveness. If re-engagement happens without the need to justify the withdrawal, deflect responsibility, or minimize what occurred, it reflects a shift toward accountability, even if it is not explicitly stated. The interaction resumes with a sense of presence rather than avoidance of the previous distance. This allows the connection to continue without resetting completely, preserving a thread of continuity that would otherwise be lost. This pattern indicates that withdrawal is being integrated rather than used as an escape. The person is learning to step back without disconnecting entirely and to return without abandoning the connection they moved away from. That balance between distance and return, when handled with intention, shows that the internal system is adapting in a way that supports connection instead of avoiding it. When an avoidant begins to prioritize your presence over their own comfort zone, it signals one of the most significant internal shifts possible within that pattern. Avoidant behavior is fundamentally structured around maintaining emotional safety through distance, control, and self-reliance. The comfort zone is not just a preference, it is a protective system built over time to prevent vulnerability from becoming overwhelming. Choosing to stay within that zone ensures predictability and minimizes the risk of emotional exposure. So when that boundary starts to be crossed voluntarily, it reflects a reordering of priorities at a deeper level. This does not appear as a sudden or dramatic transformation. It shows up in moments where they could choose distance but instead choose presence. They stay in conversations longer than they normally would, remain engaged when things become slightly uncomfortable, or continue showing up even when the instinct to withdraw is active. These decisions may seem small externally, but internally they require going against an ingrained response. Each instance represents a conscious or semi-conscious decision to tolerate discomfort for the sake of maintaining the connection. The importance of this shift lies in what is being traded. The comfort zone offers control, predictability, and emotional distance. Prioritizing presence means accepting uncertainty, exposure, and the possibility of deeper attachment. That trade does not happen unless the connection has reached a level where it holds more value than the safety provided by distance. It is not about losing the need for space, but about allowing connection to coexist with that need, rather than being overridden by it. There is also a noticeable change in how they manage tension. Instead of immediately creating space when something feels too close or intense, they begin to remain present and work through it in real time. This does not mean the discomfort disappears, but it is no longer dictating immediate withdrawal. The ability to stay engaged while experiencing that internal tension reflects an increase in emotional tolerance, which is essential for any stable connection to develop. Over time, these choices accumulate. What begins as isolated moments of prioritizing presence gradually becomes a pattern. The connection is no longer something that exists only when it feels easy or controlled. It becomes something that is maintained even when it challenges their default responses. This indicates that the internal system is no longer solely organized around protection, but is beginning to incorporate connection as a consistent and valued part of behavior. So when you see these patterns, don't measure them by how loud they are, measure them by what they cost the person to do. Anyone can offer attention when it's easy, but very few will move against their own wiring just to stay connected. That's the difference between surface-level interest and something that's real at its core. And if someone is choosing you in ways that go against everything that once kept them distant, you're not just being liked, you're being valued in a way most people never experience.